Hey guys, it's Mr. V over here doing a book review today for The Godfather of Poker, the Doyle Brunson story by Doyle Brunson and Mike Cochran. This is basically an autobiography about Doyle Brunson. Before you're considering reading this book, there's a few things you should know. I think that this is a book meant for poker players. This is not a strategy book. This is just an autobiography about Doyle Brunson. But I think it's meant for poker players because a lot of poker terms come up throughout the book. And I think non-poker players just will find it a little boring when he talks about some of these poker stories or things like that. Whereas poker players will find this book a lot of fun. I'm a poker player and I found this book a lot of fun because one of the legends of poker is Doyle Brunson. And I think all poker players who take poker seriously know that he is a legend. And that's why this book was a lot of fun, because this is an autobiography. It was released in 2009, but it still covered a lot of his life, because it is just basically a book about his whole life, from his childhood on. And his childhood, he grew up in Texas, and he just grew up in a very small town, but he grew up during the Great Depression. And he grew up in a poor family. And this is a poor family to where there was no plumbing, no hot water. They had to come sometimes share a bath, things like that. And because of that, he wanted to get out of that type of life. Like, he didn't, like, just growing up in a poor family, he wanted to be rich when he grew older. I think a lot of people do, but he really had a big goal for that. And initially, he was actually playing basketball and wanted to get to the NBA. And he even played college basketball. So he had a drive and had kind of a plan to become richer. But he got injured. And that is how he started his poker career. Is after he got injured, he started playing poker a lot more. And when he talks about his poker career, this book is very interesting, and it's somewhat intense at times. Not just his poker stories, but just like his overall life stories are pretty intense. Because he just, before playing in Vegas, he played in Texas, the Texas circuit, which is the high stakes poker all along Texas. But in, the 1950s and 1960s, poker was illegal in Texas. I don't know, it may still be illegal today in Texas, but I know at least in the book he was writing that poker was illegal in Texas. So he was in like constant danger. Not only about being arrested, because he did get arrested for playing, but he played against really bad people in these home games, and sometimes he was playing against criminals, so they would blackmail you. They would sometimes threaten you, like if you beat them for too much. They would like threaten you by saying they're going to hurt your family, and same for the blackmailing. They would do that kind of stuff. And, that's why I said the book is intense, because he was playing against those type of people. And then he also had to hope you aren't playing against cheaters, as sometimes he's playing against cheaters who were like marking the cards, and sometimes you'd play and they just wouldn't pay you the money. You'd beat them and they wouldn't pay you. So, and there was also robberies. It was like they'd come in, they knew a home game was going on, they'd rob you because they knew there was thousands of dollars. So they'd rob you, and that's why he was playing really tough when he was playing the Texas circuit, because he even saw like people get shot and things like that, to where he just had so many stories about the Texas circuit, and it was definitely very, very interesting. Like, I didn't know the start of his poker career was that difficult and that intense. So, it was a lot of fun when you're reading it. But then, even after he went to Vegas, he went to Vegas in the 1960s, but, he had to still play against these amazing poker players, and he gives you some of these amazing stories about the legends like Johnny Moss, Puggy Pearson, Bobby Baldwin, Chip Reese, Stu Unger. Stu Unger, of course, was in the early 80s, but he gives some amazing stories about some of the legends, but especially from the 1960s and 70s. He really loved to give the stories about people like the Johnny Moss and Puggy Pearson type. I think it's because they were the legends that kind of started everything. And it was a lot of fun, because he wasn't just giving stories about the poker tables, but he was giving stories about gambling. And he showed how like the big time gamblers basically gamble on absolutely everything. And when I mean everything, it was like just everything, because he had gamblers were all around him, and they would gamble, of course, on poker, but they were doing side bets on poker. They were doing gambling on golf. They were gambling on the horses. They were gambling on sports, or they were gambling on absolutely anything about who could run faster. Sometimes even the flip of a coin, things like that. Like they were like finding reasons to gamble, and they were betting big money. They weren't just like betting like $20. They were betting thousands or tens of thousands of dollars on these things, and it's just like it blows your mind when you're reading it. And it still is very interesting reading it, but it really like you just are kind of like shocked when you read it. So that was also very interesting. And another really interesting thing of the book was he talks about how the World Series of Poker got started, and it definitely had a very interesting start. Of course, there was very few players who were playing, because very few. The main event is a $10,000 buy-in, but this is 1969, 1970, 1971. $10,000 was a lot of money. It's a lot of money today, but back then it was a lot of money. So very few players could put up the money and had the confidence that they could beat the other players. So there was very few players, but the World Series of Poker had a very interesting start, and it makes sense how it started, because it initially wasn't even an elimination tournament, and you can read about that in the book. It was very interesting, but it was an interesting start because just like how they even had to change casinos and the reason they started. The casino owner, he actually invited the poker players there because he thought, let's invite the poker players here just to hope that I can get a lot of extra money from the gambling they're going to do. And that didn't work out the first year, so they had to kind of change it up the next year. So it's just a very interesting start, and it kind of had an odd start, like the Johnny Moss who won the first one, how they decided he was going to be the winner, because it wasn't an elimination in the beginning. So, that was, it was a lot of fun reading about it. And then he gives stories about basically the World Series of Poker, in the 1970s, 80s, and, to do with the 90s. And then it was incredibly interesting to hear how, one of the legends of poker felt about the 2003 poker boom. Because he had already been playing for so many decades before this poker boom. And then the poker boom happened, where basically so many things had to happen at once, and they all happened within a few months of each other. Of Chris Moneymaker, who was an amateur, won the World Series of Poker main event, and then the World Poker Tour started, which was where you could watch it on TV, and then the internet was allowing people to play poker, and probably one of the main things was the hole card cam, where you could see the hole cards of all the players. So it kind of made it like a reality TV, to where when a poker player was bluffing, you could see it. Or when two poker players would go off against each other, you could see exactly what their hole cards were. And that's what made it, just so interesting. But it was cool seeing the perspective of a legend and how he felt about the poker boom. But it was also cool seeing behind the scenes about what the pros felt about the hole card cams. Because initially, all the pros did not like the hole card cams. Some even refused to play with the hole card cam because it was exposing their game. Their game was exposed if they showed you their cards, because many times people were folding and they had made a bluff, or sometimes they were making really good hands, and then you could see how they would bet with the hole card cams. So some pros were refusing to play with it. But then they saw how many people it brought to the game, to where then the pros started to love the hole card cam, and then they were fond of hole card cam after that. But it was just interesting hearing the perspective, and he gives a lot more in depth in the book. And during the 2003 poker boom, all those things happened at once, and he even says in the book he could not have expected what could happen with poker, because he had already been playing for decades, and then within a year all those things happened, and then poker just exploded, because all of a sudden ESPN was airing it a lot. He said there was tons of books being published about poker. There was magazines all of a sudden, and card rooms across the whole country were playing poker a lot. And basically the amount of players that it brought to the game, just it was crazy. People who, had just barely played poker, all of a sudden were going and playing nonstop. And he became an overnight celebrity type of thing. And that's why he was just so shocked at what happened. He said he could have never just even thought that this would happen. And it was really cool hearing about his his perspective on it and what happened. And then what was also cool in the book was that he wrote also about his personal life, because I so far just talked about his gambling life, but he wrote about his personal life, which was really cool because you get to see what it was like to be the life of a gambler, like as his profession, the life of a gambler. You saw what his family life was like. You saw how his friends were, and it was fun hearing like the behind the scenes of Doyle Brunson. I'd always seen him on TV. You see him in the tournaments, you see him in the cash games, but it was fun hearing the behind the scenes of Doyle Brunson and just his stories, because it was very interesting hearing about his ups and downs and like the swings he had to take and how he dealt with the wins and the losses, as he took tremendous swings in poker, but also in business. Like he tried to invest in different businesses in the 90s. Some of them just didn't work out so well. Some of them were still okay, but just the amount of swings he took, sometimes in the millions, and how he dealt with it. And it was amazing seeing how he did that and how he remained strong and kept playing. And it was just amazing reading it and just his perspective on life. And it was really cool. It was really cool seeing how he did all that and how he wrote it all. And it was just, it was just a really fun book. Because also, as I say, his writing style was a very easy writing style. So it was very easy to read this book because he was just very straightforward about how things happened. He tells you the stories, and this is in a straightforward fashion, but a fun fashion too, because the stories were fun. The stories are a lot of fun, and I think he told it in a perfect way. He didn't have to like make it extra drama or anything like that, because they were fun stories. And he just had so many interesting stories about poker, about gambling, about the players, about the casino owners and criminals, and just the life of a gambler. Not just his life, he talks about so many other poker players too. So it was just a lot of fun reading it, to where I definitely recommend this for poker players. You won't learn strategy or anything like that, but it is just an amazing story. And that's why if you're a poker player or you know who Doyle Brunson is, you should definitely read this book, because it is so much fun reading it. And I just had a great time reading it, to where, again, I highly, highly recommend this book, The Godfather of Poker. If you have any comments or questions, please post it in the comment section below. I hope you guys click the subscribe button, because I upload multiple different types of book reviews. But thank you for watching my book review today. This is Mr. V. Go enjoy reading.